Hey FFR listeners, this is the producer Rob speaking. It's that time of year when everyone starts to think about the important things in life, like our taxes. Did you know that a donation to Feminist Frequency is actually tax deductible? If you have a few bucks a month to spare, head on over to patreon.com/femfreak, F-E-M-F-R-E-Q. Help us out, but also help yourself to all the great exclusive content that's available only to people who are signed up on our Patreon.
The rise in leather culture and biker culture really took off after World War II. Mm-hmm. Everyone has seen the picture of Marlon Brando as his little leather biker cap.
Boy, have we.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio presents Machos Fully Loaded. This is the podcast that asks you to be critical of the media you love, and this is the season where we're investigating masculinity in movies and TV. I'm Kat Spada.
And I'm A.C. Lamberty. Okay, what if I was like, this week, welcome to the week where we're doing an entire episode about Billy Eichner's Bros.
The first gay film.
The first ever. Can you believe it? Okay, here's my version of last week's bad intro copy.
Thank you.
This week, don't mind us if you see our Camaro driving past you on the street several times in a row. We're cruising for dudes this week as we get into the world of gay cinema. For machos who love machos. Can't wait.
Muscles.
100% pure adrenaline.
Weapons.
Your move, creep.
Dominance.
Pain don't hurt.
Machos.
The only place you're gonna go is the hospital.
I will be right back.
I mean, this is it. Every movie has gay undertones.
Oh, absolutely.
Some movies have gay overtones. I wrote this in our show notes. What is your relationship with gay? Obviously, meaning in terms of I think there is a moment when you kind of discover oh, I'm drawn to certain, types of cinema, or even researching, deciding what I was going to talk about for this episode. And it was all the recommended for you sections on the streaming services. It was oh, does she love a movie about the AIDS activism group ACT UP? Yes, she does.
Who doesn't? Yeah, my relationship with gay cinema, and when I say gay in this episode, I feel like I'm mostly mean to men. In the context of these films. But my relationship with gay cinema, I feel like I came to it aesthetically when I was kind of young. And I've just been thinking a lot about what is the common thread between all of the films that are some of my favorite films ever in the world. And it's just a sense of bombasticness that is so hallmark of gay cinema in many ways. It's my fucking life. I love this shit. It's everything. It's everything.
I was really excited when I saw what movies you were going to be talking about, because we talked about soft boys in terms of straight, a certain type of straight man portrayed on film. We talked about sex workers and how that is shown from a homosexual and heterosexual context. When we're just focusing on gay men on film, I feel we're one of us is going to talk about flamboyancy and one of us is talking about ruggedness. And I think that's a great, especially for machos, a really good investigation of what does it mean to be larger than life?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be hard and tough in these ways that are, I think, idealized as a straight quality, when it's not, that has nothing to do with being straight or not.
Yeah. And what do these portrayals both mean for the actors playing them too? The actors that we are going to be talking about today are extremely famous, award-winning, straight dudes, all of them, I think. For the most part. Yeah.
There's so much gay cinema that's independent film, low budget, and these are the movies that are going to be more created by, performed by written by actually like queer people.
Right.
But when mainstream Hollywood gets its hands on it, it has like a very different, I think that's one of those questions too, is like, when it's a Hollywood movie, Hollywood isn't trying to make something for a gay audience.
Right. Do you have any particular thoughts on straight actors playing gay roles? I don't know. I feel like I'm post this conversation at this, but I'm like, I actually am all the way around. I don't really care anymore. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. This is where like I have a broken brain and I'm like, well, generally I'm like, I don't think there's anybody who's actually straight. So like, is that me like erasing actual identity? Yes. Like, and saying that it doesn't matter? No. Like, that's where I don't want to go out and say like, well, that it doesn't matter because I don't.
Right.
I feel like
labels
everyone
shouldn't exist or whatever, but there's a material reality.
We can be. Yeah, but then it becomes Scarlett Johansson saying she could play a tree or whatever.
Right.
I think that, like, ultimately it really comes down, well, it's one of those, in a perfect world, if everybody, like, if actually, like, gay actors were getting the types of roles or the access or the ability to audition for stuff, where you'd say, oh, well, we need to have a big star in it. That's why we cast this straight guy. Like, if we had 500 Luke Evanses who could all be in these roles, then like we would be having a different conversation.
Fisting tattoo. You've seen that, right?
No. What?
This is okay. This also is absolutely the tenor of this episode. Like, I love queer theory. I love like getting deep on it, but LOL. Luke Evans also has a tattoo armband, like fisting signifier.
Bless him.
Slay. Anyway.
I mean, why didn't you bring that up when we talked about Gaston last week?
I'm sure Disney had a field day photoshopping that out. Anyway.
But I will say this, and I think I'm going to start here before I let you like bring our audience into it.
Absolutely,
is like, it does depend on the actor. So
yeah, chemistry is important.
Chemistry, but also like a lot of these actors are like pretty homophobic. And they're still taking these opportunities to be seen as like serious actors.
Oh,
and I think
I know we're going to be talking
problem.
about Matt Damon.
We are going to spend some time on Matt Damon. And like, you know, I think about like, Mark Wahlberg just played like the dad of a bullied gay son, right? Yeah. And I was like, what is this? What's happening? Like, is this good? Is this progress? Are these just the breadcrumbs we're hoping for? Or is this totally. Like, yeah, you know, this is what we get?
You about to get me started, Kat. It's assimilation politics, which drives me fucking nuts. Like, I don't know, you have a little note in here just kind of when we were brainstorming about gay cinema and things that we thought about in relation to, like, stories where Hollywood is like, oh, it just happened. This is a love story, but it happens to be gay. Or this is a comedy and it happens to be gay. That kind of assimilationist thinking is just so devastating to me. And I do think that's where a lot of like straight actors who play these mainstream gay roles operate from. Interestingly, I think there's a huge difference there with bros, but that's that's actually next week. Sorry, I messed up the intro.
So do you want to talk about this this quote I read from Jake Gyllenhaal in regards to Brokeback Mountain before we get into Brokeback Mountain?
Yeah, please. Take it away.
It said like, oh, Gyllenhaal found the assertions flattering, saying, I'm open to whatever people want to call me. I've never really been attracted to men sexually, but I don't think I would be afraid of it if it happened.
I would be afraid.
And is it like, I don't think I'd be afraid of gay sex, or like, I don't think I'd be afraid of discovering the attraction in myself. Like it's so vague, but I'm just like
so hard over like, I'm so glad that he can get some peace there. It's great.
So how did you narrow down what you wanted to talk about this week?
Boy, oh boy. I could have talked about 1,000,000,000,000,000 things. I love queer cinema. I love gay films. I love gay films that are textually gay. I love gay films that are subtextually gay. I was thinking a lot about what a gay macho was to me, and I decided to go the route of these kind of major Hollywood stars, and also taking kind of a showbiz angle. I don't know. But before I get into those, just kind of thinking about what does gay cinema mean? Like, I am very familiar with kind of like formal movements like new queer cinema, which I think is like has some of my favorite films in the world. But like, as we reach more parody, I'm not going to say a lot of parody in like mainstream filmmaking, like, is gay film as a movement only projecting gay people on screen? Do the creators have to share those identities? Where is there space for films that are iconic for gay people but are not gay at all? Like thinking about whatever happened to Baby Jane, for example.
Right.
And does that include films that we project gayness onto? Because I was really about to talk about Point Break, but there is no explicit gayness in it. You know what I mean? So
right.
I'm very interested in discussions of like what a gay cinema could look like. So that said, I also think it's really interesting to think about the identities of creators behind gay cinema. And in general, I don't really care what the background of a director or writer. Like, I don't think that straight people should be prohibited from making gay stories per se, but like there's a conversation there for sure. And that comes up, I think, is mostly the crux of like the two films that I want to talk about today. So I present to you Todd Haynes' 1998 new queer cinema masterpiece, Velvet Goldmine, which I am comfortable calling this my favorite movie of all time. It's just insane. It's amazing. It is a fictional biopic about the dramatic personal life of glam rock star Brian Slade, who's played by Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. He's beautiful. He says probably 25 words in the whole movie. It's perfect. And the story is framed by this reporter and a former fan of Brian Slade's, who's kind of this, like, he went back into the closet, gay guy, Arthur Stewart, played by Christian Bale, another crazy git. And he talks to Brian Slade's former lover, who's played by Ewan McGregor, Kurt Wilde, kind of a Nirvana-esque rocker. And you see his whole dick in the movie, which is incredible. Have you seen?
I have to tell you, it is the greatest shame of my life that I have not seen this movie. As like, in high school, I was obsessed with Ewan McGregor. I loved Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. Don't worry. I've seen Ewan McGregor. In high school, I was like, where can I find The Pillow Book? Like, how can I find movies with Ewan McGregor naked in them? And yet, I was writing slash fiction, like fanfic. I was so like, oh my God, I want to see Ewan McGregor be gay and do sex. And yet,
God,
never have seen it. It just didn't happen. And I have no excuse.
I own it on DVD. It is impossible to find anywhere. So I got the hook up.
My God.
It is brilliant. It is such a... I mean, Todd Haynes is one of my favorite filmmakers of all time. I think it's brilliant. It's an incredible historical text. It's so referential. It's so, like, indicative of Todd Haynes' style. Like, it's brilliant. It's so genius. So that deals with, performance, queerness, queer history, gay community in its own way. But then I also watched Behind the Candelabra, which is a 2013 Liberace biopic by Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah, don't worry. I've seen that.
It's... I hadn't seen it before, and for some reason I was like, I need to watch it for this episode. Like, I have to. And I sure did.
I also I really like the layers of like these straight actors playing gay men who had a public persona of flamboyant straight men.
Yes.
That everyone knew were gay.
There's levels to this shit.
Yeah.
Behind the Candelabra quite inexplicably stars Matt Damon as Scott Thorson, who plays the younger lover to Michael Douglas's Liberace. I do think both of them are giving really, really good performances, though. I did
Definitely
enjoy it.
Agree.
But my first we kind of talked about this up top, but it is so interesting to me that among the similarities between these two films, so we have showbiz, toxic gay showbiz relationships, issues of performance, glitz and glamour, and identity. The real world similarity is that it's just like such a stacked group of machos. Like, you have the heartthrob of his day, Michael Douglas, playing Liberace, which is crazy. And then you have Ewan McGregor and Christian Bale, who are two hugely prestige actors. Matt Damon, obviously, and then Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, who is hot. I don't know if he's ever going to reach the prestige that I want him to. But it's very interesting to me how these films attracted such high-level straight talent who were mostly at the top of their game, and neither film was really that successful. So it's just very interesting to me why these films, compared to for example, the films that we're going to be talking about with you, were able to attract straight talent like this. It's really interesting to me.
Well, and there's a big difference between 1998 and 2013 in terms of I think how much an actor might consider it a risk to take in his career. I feel like 1998, who was the only out gay actor from My Best Friend's Wedding? I can't remember his name. Rupert Everett. And by 2013, even, I think it was seen less as a career ender or career, damaging, and more as this could be your awards push.
Your moment. Yeah, for sure. And I definitely remember there was a bit of the awards convo around behind the Candelabra at the time, even though I think it was released as an HBO TV movie. Yeah. By the way, Matt Damon is supposed to be playing someone who's maybe in his 20s. He was 42 at the time of production.
And somebody the amount of plastic surgery that happens in that story too is there's so much dealing with it's literally about putting on and taking off masks.
For sure. Well, I think both Velvet Goldmine and Behind the Candelabra. The issue of performance, I love a showbiz film that is also gay. I feel like there's just so much richness in terms of performance and spotlight and identity that obviously Behind the Candelabra is a little bit obvious with. Liberace wants to remake his young man into his image in this kind of strange way, and also wants to adopt him, legally adopt him, which is also, I don't know, there's weird identity kind of shit there. But Velvet Goldmine is also Brian Slade is this glam rocker kind of in the tradition of David Bowie, who is constantly changing, constantly reinventing. The film is about him faking his own death and then trying to figure out if he's still alive or not. There's just so much transience to it that really resonates with me. That said, I think beyond those similarities, it's really interesting looking at both films based on who they're coming from. Todd Haynes, I could talk about for ever and ever and ever. He is such a historical filmmaker, and Velvet Goldmine is just stacked with these kind of incredible queer antiquities. It has this incredible Oscar Wilde framing where Oscar Wilde is an alien that's brought down from the sky, and then there's he has this brooch that's passed on to Brian Slade and then Kurt Wilde. But that framing is amazing. He includes Polari, which is the secret gay code language that developed. This film just revels in secrecy, secret history, and shared language and customs in just such a beautifully communal way. And it really is if you know, you know what I mean? I can't imagine my mom watching this and understanding the goddamn thing that's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe this should have been a disclaimer at the top, but like you said, we're you're maybe a little over the straight actors can't play gay conversation, but we're using gay as there's so much in these movies where it's like, well, David Bowie was pansexual. You know, like they're like different
Marilyn Monroe is a size 16.
Right. I mean, we're talking about these through our framings, but also like it's impossible to necessarily know what like people who are not around or fictional characters would have said about themselves. But I like what you said about just how much of, I mean, taking a look at performance in the context of like gay characters on screen is like just the fact that people are changing their names, right? Like that we have stage names, or there are so many, you know, writers of old who used pen names to obscure their gender or whatever it was. And how much of that is part of gay identity in these stories. Yeah,
big time. It like, again, the masks, right? Like the performance, the experimentation, and especially in Velvet Goldmine, because queer community and tradition and culture is so forefront, it's like, oh, this is like a tradition of experimentation, a tradition of finding out who you are through this, through performance, through dress, through sex. Like it's so special. But it shares with Behind the Candelabra that there's like a central gay relationship between Christian Bale's Arthur, the reporter, or no, not Christian. I mean, he's reporting on the relationship between Brian Slade, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, and Kerr Wilde, Hugh McGregor, who we see from their meeting, they're obsessed with one another. They start an affair and are like lovers, and then it just ends horribly, dramatically. But compared to Behind the Candelabra's kind of truly, for lack of a better term, like heterosexual treatment of that main relationship that between Scott and Liberace, like Velvet Goldmine feels so authentically gay in that way, because I think it's from Todd Haynes. Like when we see Brian, the main character, cheating on his literal wife, Mandy, played by Toni Collette, by the way, she's fantastic as always.
Oh my
with
God.
Kurt, there's not really like the same straight melodrama that you would get in kind of a relationship drama like this. I wrote in the show notes like as if this were Revolutionary Road and people were like screaming and shit at each other. Like that's kind of the first thing that popped into mind when I thought about the alternative. But that also feels really real to the gay experience, like the fluidity with sexuality and relationships, which the film really digs into, compared to Behind the Candelabra, which barely touches on gayness beyond it being extremely subtextual. Like, I mean, it's obvious they're in a gay relationship, but it is never explicit. But now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, maybe that's kind of brilliant. I don't know.
There is this like, I don't know if it's an instinct of like Hollywood, and for a lot of people, it's just part of a biographical truth that like, oh, there were wives. There were also wives in these stories, and like, you know, Elton John, Freddie Mercury, like those, they had wives, you know, like, but is that I think that whether the filmmaker's trying to make it like, well, the point is he was cheating with men versus like, no, the point is he had this life, and also part of his life was he was married to her. Yeah. We've talked about Rocketman, right?
I don't know if we have, man, Rocketman was a huge era for me. I don't know why, but I was like, this bad movie is the best movie I've ever seen in my goddamn life. Like, it was really something.
I can only imagine the chokehold that Taron Egerton had over your heart at that period of time.
I have to show you something insane in real time. Okay. Give me 1 second.
Oh, please. This is absolutely worth it.
So in 2019, when Rocketman came out, my roommate and I instantly became hyper fixated on this film for whatever, like obsessed with Taron Egerton. Like he is the doll. He's the boy. He's it. He's the moment. We basically ran Rocketman's awards campaign in Q4 of 2019. And hey, we got a Golden Globe, all right? We got each other this pillow that it's like so old. I essentially use it as a desk now. But we got each other.
Oh, wow. It's like a faux watercolor.
It's horrible.
Painting,
it's from like Society
print.
6. I have to hide it every time I have a Zoom call.
I mean, if I were him, I would have put a hit out on Rami Malek, because Rami Malek winning for Bohemian Rhapsody is the reason Taron Egerton got completely shut out, and it sucks because
I
it's
agree.
such a better performance, and
Agree.
it's really I've told you, I think that for my for my 40th birthday, I want all my friends to recreate the music video, the Elton John music video. For I'm Still Standing.
Absolutely, that would be incredible. Well, listen, Austin Butler, the enemy of my enemy, is my friend. Just saying. Just saying. Anyway, that all said, I feel that way about Rocketman.
Really important.
Like there seemed to be some kind of queer consciousness or like heartbeat behind it. And I do think, I mean, to my knowledge, I don't think the director is gay, but obviously Elton John is a producer on it. And I really feel that with Rocketman, form contributes to it being a queer film. Like there's something about camp and musicality and, you know, kind of that feeling of bombasticness, like I mentioned up top, that, you know, gives it that heartbeat in a way that I was missing from Behind the Candelabra. Like, Behind the Candelabra spans like 6 or 7 years. There's no mention of gay community, really, or a gay fandom, or I mean, it's all baked in, but it's just like, wow, there's nothing. And as such, it really is then one of those Hollywood. It happens to be a biopic or a romantic drama, but it is also just gay, by the way.
Right. Well, this is like an unusual case in which we're talking about public figures. I mean, especially for Liberace, but where being gay is both like crucial to their persona, but also, you know, marginalized and hidden from view. I haven't seen the new Little Richard documentary that's out that people are saying great things about.
I haven't seen it either.
But apparently it goes into like both his sexuality, but then also his like strong religious convictions. And it's like, well, Little Richard probably wouldn't be Little Richard without his, you know, without all of those things. And so it lends this like this texture to these men that we're looking at that you aren't necessarily seeing when you're just talking about like a war hero, a sports hero, a macho who's macho for all these other reasons. This is like much more complicated for these individual men because we don't know how much could be public and how much could be private. But no gay community in like the life of Liberace, that doesn't feel like a story. It feels like a photograph.
Agree. And it's I love what you said about Little Richard, like the identity piece being complicated or maybe kind of undefinable, because I think that's how so many people experience sexuality. Like there's not a cut and dry label or community for it, and that's fine. Like it literally makes no difference, really. It is just kind of a sexual proclivity thing, which that's fascinating to me too. Like stories about people like Little Richard, or even like Velvet Goldmine kind of deals with that fluidity in a really interesting way, where it's like, well, nobody ever puts a label on it, but there is explicit gay sex, there's straight sex. Nobody is putting too fine a point on it because maybe it's more complex than that. Whereas at the same time, Behind the Candelabra, I mean, as much as I'm like, there's no gayness in it, it's like, they're a gay couple, and then they're monogamous, and they're a couple like every other couple, and they're gay. Okay, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of rigidity there. Like, and for the record, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good movie. I think Matt Damon, when he commits, he can act his fucking ass off, and I love to see it. But yeah, it was missing that kind of knowledge, I think, is maybe the overarching term that a lot of great queer work that I consider great, at least, has.
So it's basically a gay film with a heterosexual subtext.
Yeah, which is very interesting to me. I think that there are a lot of films like that, including maybe one that you're talking about. It could be argued, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Obviously, like I don't think Steven Soderbergh should be canceled for directing a gay movie. I mean, he did Magic Mike. Okay, like we have to have him around for that.
Yeah.
But
okay, but like, is this the moment for the Matt Damon breakdown?
Oh, for sure. Let's do it. I saw this in your notes and laughed out loud.
I mean, yeah, skipping ahead, I'm going to be spending some time talking about Brokeback Mountain, but I always, there's something that comes up that came up more recently, but Matt Damon was in talks to be in Brokeback Mountain when the movie had been acquired and potentially was going to be directed by Gus Van Sant. And he said basically he was going to do a gay movie, The Talented Mr. Ripley. Then he was going to do a cowboy movie, All the Pretty Horses. So he said, I can't follow it up with a gay cowboy movie. LOL. And also, that is how it works. Like, that is how these actors' careers work. Is you do have to say, like...
like,
totally.
Totally. I laughed.
Yeah, and it's like, actresses who say, I can't play a mom of somebody that old because then I will no longer ever get roles except as like some old lady. Like, that is true for actors. But I think that what was amazing to me was the 2021 revelation that Matt Damon had to stop using the F slur in 2021 because his daughter told him to. And everyone was like, wait, so you were just casually using it in your life, even like after
I'm literally
Talented Mr.
from
Ripley
Boston. So, yeah. What do you expect?
And then he put out like another statement. He was like, it was a joke in my 2003 movie Stuck on You. Like, it's not just old fashioned. Like, that movie's very recent. Like, he explained this to his daughter.
Wow. Oh my God. That's so funny. He texted me that night and he was like, is it true that saying this is not okay? And I was like, I honestly think it's fine, but like, you probably should put out a statement.
Do you know what that reminds me of? Or you told me about your Taron Egerton pillow. This was like early in my days of like, I went to girls' school, right? So I didn't know I didn't know any boys until college. And somewhere like in those early years after college, like the boys who had been in the closet or who were in the process of coming out, like when we were in school, were now living in the world. And I remember catching up with one of them and we were on a long drive and I was like asking him, like, I was like, you don't have to answer this question, but like, I had some question about like sexual politics, like between men. And I was like, I don't even remember what the question was, but it was like one of those very, a question your parent might ask you, like kinds of things. And he was like deeply uninterested in the conversation and was like kind of casually looking at his phone. And
you
his
were on your
was,
Hannah Horvath shit.
For sure. But the response he gives me, I was like, oh my God, like I can literally never talk to any human again after this was, look, Kat, I'd really love to talk more about this, but Kim Jong-il just died.
God, oh my God. Oh my God, that's so funny.
And I was like, oh my God, and obviously we started talking about that. And I remember thinking like, I'm going to have to do my own research. I can think of no better way to shut down a conversation than revealing the news.
That is so funny. That's, oh my God, incredible. Wow. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Okay, before I transition this to you,
Yeah.
Gay movies are my favorite thing in the world. It's my life. It's whatever. I want to give a quick list of some gay macho for macho films that I really recommend. These are pretty much all about gay men, based on the conversation. The Birdcage, obviously, one of my favorite films of all time. Hilarious, brilliant, the funniest movie ever in the world. Cruising by William Friedkin, a foundational text for me. Also insane. Al Pacino does poppers. It's everything. Swoon, I would also highly recommend. It is a new queer cinema film, kind of docudrama about a gay serial killer. It's very interesting, very good.
Ooh.
Please Baby Please from last year. Kat, I actually think you would really love this one. Strange. About a straight couple, both kind of discovering their sexual and gender identities after a run-in with a sexy biker gang. It's great. Highly recommend. And then finally, if you want to get real obscure with it, Rotting in the Sun from Sebastian Silva premiered at Sundance this year. Currently in talks to be acquired. If it ever is, I highly recommend it. Just gay, misanthropic murder mystery comedy. That is everything. It's so good. I love gay cinema. Happy to be here.
So, taking us from the stadium stage down to the working man's day.
Place.
That's where I'm going. I found it really interesting that, like, when I was thinking specifically about machos in gay cinema and not, there's initially I was like, Hollywood cinema with gay themes, and I thought of Tu Wong Fu and The Adventures of Priscilla, and some of those movies that were The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. It's the first movie I remember seeing in theaters, actually. Yeah. My parents took me to see it when I was a kid.
Incredible.
And then I was like, those movies have such like masculine men and they're playing drag queens, but I kind of wanted to take a look at the gay man who he's gay, but he's also like a working class. He's not a performer. And especially, it's something that when people talk about like gay movies, like Brokeback Mountain is one of the top ones. So of recent years, I wanted to kind of get into that one. And I want to completely disclaim that, like, I feel really weird talking about Tom of Finland to my friend who has a Tom of Finland tattoo.
Oh my God. No, we're going to learn together, babe.
I just, I think that, like, looking at blue-collar identity or values or careers and its overlap with gay men or gay culture, like, you have to look at leather culture. Uh-huh. And you have to look at these kinds of very macho gay subcultures. Okay. So I will use the Tom of Finland biopic from a few years as just like a little bit of a framing for that background.
Cool. I haven't seen any Tom of Finland films. The biopic nor the doc. I think there's a doc, right?
Yeah, the doc is from the 90s, which I'm really interested to watch that because it's from more recently after he passed away, whereas this Tom of Finland, which is just called Tom of Finland, film from 2017, it was like funded by the Finnish Arts Council. Like this, what's amazing is that Tuku Laaksonen, who was the artist known as Tom of Finland, is one of Finland's great cultural exports. And the country embraces that.
That's great.
And it makes me so happy because it's not like, oh, he was Finnish and he was an artist and we embrace him. And did you know he was gay?
Yeah.
It's like, no, what he was inspirational for, what he was influential for was homoerotic art. And that is that the country, I think, has embraced that is fantastic. mean, I'll just jump ahead that in 2014, the Postal Service put out first class stamps with some of his artwork on them.
Whoa,
if you scroll down in the notes, you can see the picture.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm going to need to find these on eBay.
There's a full butt in one of these stamps. It's fantastic.
Amazing.
And they were obviously the best-selling stamps ever published by the Finnish Postal Service.
Yeah.
People from 178 countries pre-ordered them when they were announced.
Oh.
I have been trying to track down. There were several Tom of Finland cross-stitch kits that were released by the Tom of Finland Foundation a few years ago, but they're very expensive on resale.
Oh.
So this movie came out in 2017, and I'd had a personal, I don't know, whatever. I'm not a member of the leather community, but I've been a fan of Tom of Finland for many years. I think I remember the first time I was walking past like a gay bookstore in Hillcrest, the gay neighborhood in San Diego. And they had a Christmas window display that was all Tom of Finland, like ornaments and books and calendars and things like on a Christmas tree. And his artwork was just beautiful to me. It was something that I wasn't expecting, and it had been around for decades, but I just thought like he has such a distinct style, and I like to refer to him as the Thomas Kincaid of homo masculinity in the way that people say, like, oh, you can always tell a Tom of Finland drawing, of course. Yeah. Like, so his art is very stylized, and it's like deceptively simple because it's illustration. And these are, especially later in his career, his drawings became a lot more like photorealistic. And I could almost see like a mail away art school being like, learn how to draw your own Tom of Finland drawing, because they all have a very similar format. The men they're extremely muscular, and they're round. They're all very round in a way that is
like
done with shading and light.
Like it's, I don't know. There's like a juiciness, of course.
Yes. Absolutely. And they have big butts and big bulges. And, a lot of the drawings do have them clothed in tight-fitting clothes, but there are certainly more explicit drawings. He did like 3,500 illustrations. And this biopic is really well made because it's a great story of a man. Like, it's not just a tale of like this culture. It's not just a tale of this impact. It shows how he was a man who would do pornographic drawings to get himself off. And that's how it started. But he was drawing pictures of male laborers. And then he served in World War II. And that's where his art style kind of really took off.
Yeah.
The aesthetic fetishizing men in uniform was cemented at this time.
Yeah.
And not just for him. I mean, he didn't invent this. Like, there was the rise in like leather culture and biker culture really took off after World War II. Everyone has seen the picture of Marlon Brando as like his little leather biker cap.
Boy, have we.
So it was this like kind of next step, I think, in the evolution of like gay male imagery. Because previously it had all been this sort of winking under the radar thing. A lot of pictures, photo spreads, magazines dedicated to athletes, athletic men, wrestlers, bodybuilders. That was kind of where, with censorship laws, gay pornography could exist in the margins. And then kind of bringing it into these more editorial storytelling drawings that Tom of Finland was doing pushed it to the next step. So I hadn't really thought about it until you were talking about the fact that there are sort of like central relationships in beyond the Candelabra and Velvet Goldmine, but also Laaksonen, Tom of Finland. He did have a partner for 30 years of his life. This biopic tells that story as well.
Yeah.
And he also had a very close relationship with his sister. They were both artists. They both worked in advertising, and Tom's partner was a dancer. So they were in this sort of like mid-century artistic part of the world in Helsinki. And that is something that you won't see in any other movie, probably.
Dreamy. Oh,
Yeah.
that sounds amazing. I also I think it's always interesting to me the kinds of professions or identities that gay fetish emulates and how that can be problematic occasionally, like the cop shit.
Totally.
There's a huge moment for that in Cruising, by the way, which is interesting. But I mean, that is a reaction to historical oppression as well. Like, it's fascinating that like the objective fetishizing is often groups that you would think would, be not as
excellent
revered.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this, there are scenes in this movie that come from like times he was afraid. Times he was afraid because he was in war, in combat. Times he was afraid because the park was being raided by the police and they had these big leather boots and nightsticks. And how did that fear blend with the eroticism of it?
Yeah.
He was very vocal in his later years. Some of his early drawings included Nazi soldiers who were the people he was fighting against in World War II.
As we said, something in leather too. Like there's a whole kind of skinhead thing. Yeah. Subculture.
He was absolutely like very clear and said, like, I'm not saying verbatim, but he said, I am disgusted by all of the ideology. I found the uniforms sexy. Like that is why I did those drawings. But then they were not included in retrospectives of his work that were published later. And there's an editor. I don't know any background on her, so I'm almost like nervous to quote her because I'm not sure what her story is. Diane Hansen. Does that name ring a bell?
No, that's me.
Okay. We're just fingers crossed here. So she spoke about the central character in a lot of Tom's art, who is named Kake. That's a Finnish word that kind of means butch, or it's like connotes that. And he's been a character in many, many of Tom of Finland's comics. He's actually played by an actor in the movie because he sometimes shows up to just kind of wink at Tom in the corner of a scene, like Kake embodied.
I love that.
And Hansen described this character as a sort of Johnny Appleseed traveling the world on his motorcycle, spreading the seeds of liberated, mutually satisfying, ecstatically explicit gay sex. And I just think that that is something that with all of that fetishization and the fact that we have cops and sailors and all these like, industrialized or militarized groups, there is joy in all of this art. And I think that like looking back at that and thinking about seeing that window display in that bookstore, I was like, that's what struck me. I was like, yes, joy, Christmas, happy, and happy with big, bulging, beautiful men who are having the time of their lives, having orgies on top of each other. And it is fantastic.
I am getting you a Tom of Finland ornament for Christmas.
please. And then the movie, does go into some of like his later years when he eventually was he had been mailing away his art to publications in the US for many decades while he was still working as an advertising illustrator in Helsinki. And by the time he ended up traveling the world and going to International Mr. Leather and being given honorifics and welcomed into every party and nightclub, they were like, oh my God, you are our hero. We've looked at your art for decades. And he was just like, oh, amazing. I've just been doing this. Like, this has just been my life on the side. Like, this is my side hustle. And
so
yet
cool.
It's very cool.
I mean, the real kind of, if you know, secret, shared history aspect of all of these films. I just love it. It's really sweet.
And one more point on that, like, the kind of troublesome nature of some of the fetish side of this is that, like, I'd like to read more about this, but there are Black men in his work as well as white men.
Yeah.
And they are portrayed in a way that is, like, in line with a lot of stereotypical depictions of sexualized Black men. But that is the way that Tom's drawings depict all of the men that he depicts. So that's sort of interesting. I'm curious, you know, have people gone into the notion that, like, where was Tom of Finland seeing these guys? You know, did he have models in Helsinki in the 50s? I don't know. But
interesting.
Really recommend the movie. I feel like I saw it at, like, the 10 a.m. matinee.
At, like, a Lemley, probably.
Absolutely, at the Pasadena Lemley with, like, 3 old guys and me, and I was just like, yay. Like,
I love that.
I think that's what's so interesting about his art, is that it is, like, I find it incredibly welcoming. And I don't know why I feel that way. Again, I just think because there's such, like, kind of verve in it.
Yeah.
That he's had, you know, there have been exhibits. There was a Toshin art book. And
man, I want that book.
Just, yeah. I mean, it's just, but such a real legacy. The film also gets into how he was able to have books published in the first place, because you know, they were trying to get it published not by pornography publishers, but book publishers wouldn't touch it. So there's some interesting plot that happens.
I love that. It's cool.
Yeah.
I have to check this one out.
So, and I also wanted to mention, I'll link it in the show notes, but there is we might have talked about it a couple of episodes ago, a podcast called The Competition.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and the second season of it is all about the Los Angeles leather competition, and does portray a few different people. In particular, I always remembered an interview with a man named Jose, who talks about being a younger man, being HIV positive, being Latino, and being in this community. And looking to, or trying to identify, like, when did my interest in, like, leather start? And he can remember just the impact that the boots of his working class father had on him when he was young. Not the like impact the boots had on him physically, just like seeing them and having a feeling for them. And wait, did I have a point? I did have a point. Did I have a point? It's a good series. I don't know.
It.
That's all.
It is very
Sorry,
good.
I did have a point, which was in the context of our, like, Machos examination here. We've looked at how, like, when there are straight characters in movies and they display a sort of, like, typically or traditionally feminized quality, that becomes gay coded. It becomes like, oh, well, he's sensitive, he's gay, he's what this must
art.
mean. Yeah, exactly. Art equals gay.
Yeah.
And this culture just kind of reverses that. It's like a gaze that associates these masculinized qualities of oppressors or of tough men, of dads, of working class, like, macho guys, with a sense of power and pride that is otherwise not always afforded to people in the community. So
I love that.
Yeah. So I rewatched Brokeback Mountain.
Damn. Can you quit me?
No, obviously not. When did you first see this movie?
When it came out, I would have been 9 years old, so definitely not then. I think I watched it for the first time in college at some point, but I honestly wouldn't consider myself as having seen this movie.
Oh, wow.
Believe it or not. Because my associations with it from literally the award cycle it happened in is that it's just, like, been a huge punchline. I know it's a great movie, but, like, that was such the cultural conversation.
It really, really was. I mean, this, I feel like my friends and I were just so hyped to see this movie. It came out when we were in college. But we had, I mean, Heath Ledger remains one of the all-time hottest people.
The hottest hotties of all time.
Of all time. Like, he never... he's just... I remember, I mean, when I was, like, young, he had a Vanity Fair cover, and I tore all of the pictures out of that photo spread out, and I put them on my wall. And my parents, you know, I had all these pictures of like, people on my wall. Everybody from, like, hot people to, like, comedy people that I liked, whatever. But he, like, showed his pubes in it, and I was like, man, my parents must have been like, God, our daughter is, like, too horny, because these pictures were so hot. And then I remember it being announced, like, Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal are going to be in the gay cowboy movie. And we were just like, we're there day one.
Yeah.
And
that's how I felt about Call Me By Your Name. After hearing Susie and Steve and just doing the soundtrack, I was like, well, I'm simply, like, literally same college age thing. Like, yes, completely. I feel you.
And it was like, it was very, like, ripe for punchline in a weird way, because there's just, like, so many pieces to it that it's like it has to kind of fight against, I think. Between the fact that the casting of Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal, I mean, they're sort of, like, pretty and young, and just the mere fact they were cast, all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, of course Donnie Darko is gay. Like, now that's the conversation, is like, well, these guys are secretly gay. The fact that they were cowboys, which just has this connotation, like, it wasn't like, oh, now here's a great big Hollywood movie about gay men in the 60s. It was that they were gay cowboys in the 60s. Like, just the cowboy bit, sorry to interrupt, is just so fascinating, because when we talked about machos who fuck, both of the films I watched, Midnight Cowboy and Hustler White, make a point of displaying that, like, the cowboy aesthetic is something that gay clients want. Like, it is a gay thing if you're a gay sex worker. A la the Tom of Finland kind of working class aesthetic. Yeah, and it's very sexual. I mean, like, there's so much about, like, bronco riding that they're talking about in this, that is, like, you know, even in whatever mainstream pop country song, Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy, like, we can talk about how there's just, like, a sexual connotation to all of this stuff. And unfortunately, especially of the era of our late night pundits talking about things, and our 24-hour news pundits, the name Brokeback Mountain just lends itself to a lot of shitty puns. You had pundits calling it, you know, Humpback Mountain or whatever, like shit like that. So it's like, I feel like it had everything kind of stacked against it. Yeah. And I remember going into the theater, like, with my girlfriends, like, holding hands, being like, oh my God, we're about to see, like, the two men we love fall in love. And then it starts, and I was like, I truly don't know. I remember feeling like, I don't know if I want this to be a good movie, or if I just want it to be, like, a full-on Cinemax, like, crappy, just, like, porn. Like, softcore, Yeah. And, spoiler alert, it's a beautiful movie. And it's so interesting. I mean, watching it again, I was looking at it from the context of, like, what being blue collar meant to these characters, because they were put in this situation where they had, like, financial insecurity and instability. Yeah. And they took this horrible job. I mean, this horrible job in terms of, like, bad weather, eating cans of beans, like, exclusively unless you could hunt something to eat, all summer herding sheep. That's how these two characters meet. And when their first summer, like, term gets canceled early, the guy who owns all the sheep is like, there's going to be a big storm. Why don't you bring them back a month early? there's both two things happening. One is like, oh no, we're not going to have our secret private life together anymore.
Yeah.
And, well, shit, now I don't have that extra month of wages I needed.
Right.
And I think there was just something really interesting about like the tenuousness of these relationships that are made just so much more fraught by poverty. And, you know, all of the relationships in this movie are really affected by income.
Okay.
So what happens most of the movie, I mean, is what happens after that summer on Brokeback Mountain when these two men go back to their lives. Heath Ledger plays Ennis, who stays in Wyoming, gets married to his wife Alma, played by Michelle Williams. And there's a lot of like their sex scenes are kind of tied up in like, or they're not just their sex scenes, their fight scenes, their dinner scenes are tied up in like, well, I need to take a shift. Well, why do you think I can watch the kids just because you can go get another job? She doesn't want to have sex without protection if he won't be able to support the children. So there's like a lot of just like finance that we're dealing with. And in contrast to like, you know, that's why cowboys, I mean, they could have been factory workers. They could have been like another kind of low income blue collar worker. But this story wouldn't be this story if they were executives who met on a company retreat and had like a magical romance. You know, there wouldn't be this kind of tension of like, what do you need? Like,
film would be called, are you ready for the title? We have to perfect our pitch. Two Truths and a Lie. Hello.
And like what's the tag? It's like, sometimes a trust fall. Sometimes you trust fall in love.
Oh my God. Wait. I'm like, is this the Patreon? Well, we'll discuss. I'm like, who are we casting? Okay, continue.
So these two men are kept apart by you name it. Like, the what makes this a kind of 20-year long love story is that Jack, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, is like, we can have a life together. We can just go like live in a cabin and work on the ranch, and like nobody's gonna bother us.
Bestie vibes.
And the total bestie vibes, like Boston Marriage or whatever.
Exactly.
And Ennis, who like grew up seeing having a very like homophobic, violent father. He's like, no, that's not possible. Like, we have lives, we have children, we have wives, we have to have work. We're not going to be in the world. We're not going to be in society. It's not possible. And he's saying all of these things. I mean, he's in rural Wyoming, but he's saying all of these things from 1963 to 1983. And it's so interesting that like that felt very true at the time, but at the same time, there were people in cities looking at Tom of Finland drawings and like having relationships, you know, like this is all happening while Liberace is happening. Like all of this,
right. Oh, that's
it's not like this is a story from like 1810, you know?
Yeah.
And obviously, just to kind of like wrap up on the gay cowboy thing, like when this movie came out, and it's been talked about and published so much since then, but there is a long history of like homosexual relationships being commonplace in the frontier or like out in isolation. So a lot of the discourse about this movie also became like, well, were they actually gay, or was it just that like they were lonely and they had each other, which is the ultimate, like, if it happened to me, I wouldn't be afraid of it. Jake Gyllenhaal.
I'm different.
It's a very, you know, it's a very touching movie about loss and about grief.
That's interesting, though, the identity piece of it, because I mean, it just goes back to that kind of fluidity of identity that we just don't have language for. Like, that's how, like, when we were talking about Velvet Goldmine, I mean, there's no real labeling there's no real, like, I don't know, desire to categorize or box in with a lot of these, like, mainstream gay films in a weird way. Yeah.
There's also a play in this movie with, like, what intimacy looks like for these two characters. And there's a lot of, like, blending between aggression and sex and laughter and fun and tenderness. And it's like, because these are also men who are in, like, a part of culture and society where they are not allowed to feel really anything, that in this experience they get to feel everything, I think also just makes for a very very heightened storytelling. I just want to kind of wrap up on Brokeback Mountain with something that I read about Annie Proulx, who wrote the short story that it was based on. So there's this line in the movie where Jack's saying, hey, we can, why don't we do this? Why don't you get a divorce and we'll just go live together. We'll just go have a life. And Ennis says, like, that's not possible. And if you can't fix it, you've got to stand it. So you just have to be able to bear up under the difficulties of the world you live in, the hand you're dealt. So at first, when the movie came out, Proulx said, I'm probably the only writer who's ever had, like, her work so truthfully, faithfully adapted to the screen. Like, I got to see my story come to life without any concessions.
Cool.
Years later, she was like, I regret that movie ever got made.
Wow.
Simply because she gets so much fan fiction sent to her by
oh my god,
so many alternate, like, stories or versions are sent to her by, like, men who said you can't write men because you're a woman, or people who wanted to see a happier ending or a different outcome. And she said, they certainly don't get the message that if you can't fix it, you've got to stand it. And I just thought that was incredible.
Oh my god. I am very curious. I mean, I don't think it's official, obviously, by any means, but the Pedro Almodovar film, short film that's opening Cannes, he has described it as a response to Brokeback Mountain, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Or like a Brokeback Mountain that actually has like explicit gay sex in it. I'm curious if she is going to be there. Probably not. Or if she'll see it and have a take.
Very interested in that, because Almodovar was in talks at one point to direct this movie.
Yeah.
And he said he didn't want to do it because he wouldn't have full creative control.
Yeah.
So
well,
that's the question too, is like, would Annie Proulx only have found her story to be well told by someone like Ang Lee, a straight man, who, I think tells the story very beautifully? Or is that not the story she was trying to tell? Was it that he wanted Rossi De Palma to play every character, in which case I would like to see it?
Same.
But just finally, like, mini recommendation on, like, another kind of Hollywood kind of goes down easy movie, which is Pride by Matthew Warchus from 2014.
So fun. So good.
It's so fun. I feel like this is a great kind of blend of such a good cast. We talked about George Mackay, our baby boy, George Mackay.
Baby boy. Oh my god. Freaking Paddy Considine, underrated. I know he's literally in House of the Dragon, but his stuff is so underrated. He's amazing.
Dominic West, Andrew Scott,
Slay.
Bill Nighy, of course, and like all the ladies, your Imelda Stauntons are there.
Yes.
This is a good blend, I think, between the working class blue collar stuff that I was talking about and a little bit more of the like leaning into gay culture or out experience that was happening at the time in the 80s. It's based on a true story about a group of lesbian and gay activists who supported the British miners' strike in the mid 80s. And what's kind of great to see in this movie, I mean, it's a character story. You're following people who are dealing with like, well, I know what it was like to grow up in a small Welsh mining town, and they were super homophobic to me, and I do not want to support the miners, to a more, I believe he was a communist, the leader of this group, who said, you know, the oppressed have to have solidarity in order to take down the oppressor, because if they are oppressed, we are oppressed, and vice versa. And showing how that existed when you had a pretty xenophobic, homophobic community, and then you also had, like, in the cities, the lesbian and gays support the miners group. Yeah, so check that one out. Like I said, it goes down real smooth.
It's lovely.
I would love to tell people to watch BPM, which is that ACT UP movie from a couple of years ago. But, like, you're going to have to steel yourself for a lot of, like, crying about AIDS when you watch that movie.
It is fantastic. Yeah.
It's so good. And it is really a great Machos Who Love Machos movie, because it's sexual and it's political, and it's a very, like, there are parts of that movie that I'm like, I don't know if I could watch that again. There was so much grief in it. But also, everyone needs to learn more about ACT UP. They're, like, the activist organization that I think just should be taught in school. You should know about it. So,
have you seen How to Survive a Plague?
I haven't seen it. For a second, I thought you were talking about All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, but
no.
How
to Survive a Plague is about ACT UP. It's a documentary. It's really good, very comprehensive, based on the book of the same name. Great starting point, I think.
Yeah, I will be checking that out for sure. And, like, there's okay, look, we don't need to, like, invent just now we're going to talk about AIDS. Like, now this podcast is like that's okay. Just How to Survive a Plague. Let's watch it. Then you can go watch all of these movies and see that there is so much to talk about on this subject. Yeah, I would be curious if you actually, like, sit and watch Brokeback Mountain to let me know what you think.
I'm sure I'll love it, honestly. Like, I'll have to fast track that one for sure. And the Tom of Finland biopic sounds fun, like much funner than I thought it was going to be. But always apprehensive about portrayals of his work, so that's great.
It's really delightful, and the casting is also just, I mean, it's very, very good.
Yeah.
All right, well, we will be right back to share this season's version of the Freak Out Macho of the Week.
Hey, FFR listeners. Are you signed up to our Patreon yet? If you're not, you're missing out on special content made exclusively for our patrons. And if you're not a patron, that means that you're not helping me get paid. And if you're not helping me get paid, that means my good little dog Griffin isn't getting the good treats. Head on over to patreon.com/femfreak. That's FEMFREQ. Become a patron to get great content and also to make sure my dog Griffin gets the good treats. Oh, and you get the good treats as well, which in your case would be quality discussions about media.
Now it's time to talk about the macho that's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. AC, talk to me.
Have we ever done a macho that is infuriating us? Maybe next week.
Yeah. Optimus Prime.
That man pisses me off, and he's a man.
By the way, I did have a long conversation this week with someone about, like, can we consider Optimus Prime a boy? I think that was how the conversation went. Is he a boy or a girl or neither? I mean, neither to me, but
yeah, he's a boy to me. Anyway, our macho this week is not infuriating us or upsetting us. He is thrilling and moving us, I would say. I mostly just wanted to pick him because he's a very hot gay guy, which we love. So,
yeah.
Welcome, Macho of the Week, to the Hall of Machos, Coleman Domingo. It's one of the hottest gay men we have these days. You may know him from Fear the Walking Dead. I certainly don't. I know him from Euphoria. Zola. I think he's underrated in Zola. He's going full wacky with it. And the new
Loved him
Candyman
in
from Nia
Zola.
DaCosta. Yes. He is so beautifully hot. And I really wanted to highlight how he met his husband. If you're
Ooh.
unfamiliar with how. He and his husband are both beautiful, and they run a production company in Los Angeles. They're so cool. Big fan. Okay, so this is from an Out article, which, haha, very funny. Here is what we have. His husband's name is, let me find out.
Raul. I did know that for some reason.
That's hot. Okay. Okay. As one in a series of modern lovers story, Domingo recounts the story of how back in 2005 he went to a Berkeley, California Walgreens to pick up a Queen Helene mud mask. First of all, obsessed.
That's incredible.
It was there that he saw Raul, who was on the phone. The pair locked eyes, but Raul was being pulled out of the store by a friend. This was a misconnection if there ever was one, and that's what Craigslist is for.
No.
So Raul writes a post that says, "I saw you outside of Walgreens in Berkeley," and then Coleman Domingo finds it later while searching for, quote, a used iPod Touch on Craigslist. And he wrote back via email and said, "To the sweet angel with the most arresting eyes." And then that's how they met. This is a little, to me, this is crazy, but to some people it might be lovely. The last part of the article says, on their first date, when Domingo thought Raul was asleep, he whispered, "I think I love you." So there's that. I get it. It's cute and maybe even hot, but I would be like, okay, this is insane. But you never know.
It depends on the people in the room.
I am obsessed with that story being public. Like, thank you. It's incredible. It's so sweet.
That's the epitome of, Lord, I have seen what you have done for others.
Yes. Big time.
I mean, I didn't know that, like, there were good stories that came out of misconnections, and this is the best story to come out of that.
So lovely. They got married in a ceremony where they just told friends they were having a party and to come over.
Sweet.
And then they came over and were like, surprise, we're getting married, and had a little ceremony and then a party. Like, he's the coolest.
And he's definitely one of those red carpet style icons, I think, of today's man.
Yes.
Yes. I always remember him at the end of an awards show. I'm like, he looks so good.
So handsome. I have a dream. One of my dream roles I would love to see him in. I have a fantasy of a gay porn murder mystery dramedy. Ooh. I want him to be a leather daddy suspect.
Oh, wow.
I think he'd be amazing to bring it back to Tom of Finland.
Not totally related, but Drew Droege has like a new play out. Have you heard about this? It's like,
I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a murder mystery about like white gays who...
Oh, fun. I didn't know it was a murder mystery. That's cool.
I think it's something like that. It's like Clue, I think is how he sort of described it. So if you're in LA, I know they are doing, or maybe they recently did, some like stage readings of it.
Sounds very fun.
Thank you for
welcome,
that.
Coleman Domingo. You're so hot. We love to see a gay man winning.
Tell us what Optimus Prime says in the Hall of Machos. We'll be waiting. This is my message to Coleman Domingo.
I thought you were talking to me. I was like, I don't have a bit prepared.
And that's just that's what you get from Machos Fully Loaded this season of Feminist Frequency Radio.
Feeling too earnest about Coleman Domingo to come up with a joke about Optimus Prime.
Never
Christ.
too earnest. That's our show for today. Thank you for joining us for this season of Feminist Frequency Radio, presenting Machos Fully Loaded.
I am A.C. Lamberty, and you can follow me on Instagram and Letterboxd at A.C. Lamberty. Letterboxd has our syllabus. Check out what we're talking about.
I'm Kat Spada. I'm on Twitter at @Kat_EX_Machina. Make sure you're following Feminist Frequency on social at FemFreak. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, stick around for the bonus episode where we'll be talking about the 2011 to 2016 Showtime series Gigolos for no other reason except that I am desperate to ruin my reputation.
Seems like a long-running show for something I've never heard about. Okay, if you like the show, help other people find it by subscribing, rating, and commenting on your favorite podcast app.
Thanks so much for listening.
Bye.